Matt Moore. How's it going, bud?
I am doing excellent. I am honored to be sitting here next to you to do this.
Yeah, you were only the second person that's ever been in that seat.
Well, then I will take it as an honor.
So, I've given the current situation about the banking system, you were actually the first person I thought about when it came to like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and all that other stuff. And you're not a socialist.
Sure, that's very true.
So it kind of helps out. Would you mind first giving me a short National Geographic? Don't give me National Geographic. Give me a short Reader's Digest of who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. So I am a sound money fanatic. And what I mean by that is one of my favorite things to do is I've got a radio show that's syndicated in LA, Seattle, and Atlanta. We started here in Tulsa. But I talk a lot about Bitcoin. I talk a lot about money. I talk a lot about libertarian ideas, freedom, technology, history. We have a lot of great guests that come on the show. We've been doing it for about 2 years. I'm also the author of a book called Foundations for Liberty, which is basically a Christian case for libertarian ideas. And then the second half of the book is about monetary sovereignty and how the system that we have today is broken, because a lot of times when people think about their personal freedoms or their sovereignty, they think about the government, they think about laws, they think about natural laws, they think about, sometimes spiritual laws. But a lot of times we don't actually think about our overall economic energy, the overall time, labor that we spend on a day-to-day basis working for these things called dollars. And so if you understand that the monetary system that we have now is constantly bleeding and is compromised, then essentially your life force is compromised. And so the tool that we use to represent our life force needs to also be in a sound place, a decentralized place, in my opinion, in order for us to truly be sovereign over our own life. Because if this tool that I'm using called, a dollar is bleeding purchasing power every day, essentially I'm slaving for something that is losing value every single day, which is devaluing my own life force.
Yeah. That makes sense. I the most I've ever known about money was I didn't have it.
Sure.
And don't put it in the savings account, even though growing up, that's what they did with savings account. But I was like, but if you're losing money by putting it in a savings account, why would you put it in a savings account?
Right. Yeah. But so like right now, if you were to have a savings account, I always say saving is for losers. And the reason why I say that is because the way our monetary system works right now, if you put all of your money and all of your wealth in the bank in a savings account, the amount of interest that they're going to give you is going to be less than the rate of inflation. So essentially, you're not even going to break even on that money, because as the time goes on, the goods that you want to purchase in the future are going to be worth that much more. Yeah. So in other words, the monetary system incentivizes us to go further along the risk curve in order to receive a return on that investment, in order to have either the same amount of wealth that we have today or more in the future.
Okay.
And does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
It does. I've heard a lot of people talking about the banking system is shutting down.
Sure.
Because the major banks are closing. Now I've seen where the federal government, of course, is throwing money at it again. Sure. You probably understand it better, and you can put it in stupid people terms. Because I understand stupid people terms.
Yeah, no, I could give it in stupid people terms. So, so there is right now, whether we're talking about Silicon Valley Bank or Silvergate Bank, there's these banks that are failing. In fact, it was, I believe, the second largest bank failure since 2008. And the federal government and the central bank are trying to do their best to prevent contagion. There's a lot of talk out there that it may not be enough, but people are kind of breathing a sigh of relief. But that's kind of what we saw in 2008 when things started to crumble. We started putting Band-Aids on things, and then it just, another grass fire popped over here. And really what has happened is these banks are over leveraged, and they have to be over levered in order to prove a successful business model. We're talking about that risk curve again. Banks are essentially lending money they don't have. And so if you look into an idea called fractional reserve banking, essentially, if I were to deposit $100 in the bank, traditionally over the last 2 decades, the bank would keep $10 of that in their bank, and then they would loan out the other $90, and then they would just type on the screen that you actually had $100. So they're creating these bank credits. And that's really where you see a lot of the money creation, is because banks have the ability to, in a roundabout way, create money out of thin air. And it really all starts with the central bank. People hear the word Federal Reserve and they think, oh, it's part of the government. It's federal. Well, not really. The federal government basically in 1913 gave permission to a cartel of private banks to create this system known as the Federal Reserve. And I always joke that, the Federal Reserve is no more federal than Federal Express. And essentially what the federal government did was, yes, the federal government does have some kind of oversight over the Federal Reserve, but they essentially gave the Federal Reserve a license to create money out of thin air. So basically, if you and I were to print money in our basement, that would be called counterfeiting. But the Federal Reserve has been given the license to counterfeit money. And so if you look at the banking system today, it's always important to go back to how is money created. And if you look at the way we create money today, and I'll get into money versus currency later, but that's for another conversation. So essentially what happens is the government, the federal government, issues an IOU, which is known as a bond. So then that IOU gets taken to auction and gets sold at auction. And sometimes you'll have countries buy our bonds. Sometimes you'll have primary dealer banks buy our bonds. But there's a group of primary dealer banks, these mega banks like JP Morgan and the likes. They're part of this primary dealer bank system. And what'll happen is, whether it be nation states or whether it be JP Morgan buying these government bonds or these glorified IOUs, they're going to turn around and they're going to end up selling some of those IOUs, those bonds, to the private Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve will open up its checkbook and write a blank check and buy those bonds from those primary dealer banks. And presto, new money is created. And so ever since when we went off the gold standard in 1913, or any form of it in 1971, because Nixon finally completely took us off the gold standard in 1971, essentially what happened is our money became a complete unit of debt. And so what happens is, if you borrow the first dollar into existence and you owe interest on that dollar, where are you going to get the extra dollars to pay for the interest? Well, you got to borrow again. And so it's a perpetual system of borrowing or debt, in which there's always more debt in the system than there is currency. So when you hear politicians talk about balancing our budget, paying down our debt, or living within our means, all of this is great in theory, but even the debt ceiling, how they always kind of raise the debt ceiling and they continue to raise the debt ceiling. Well, it's because they have to. And so when you even when you hear conservative politicians talking about, we need to live within our means and take care of our debt, most of them don't understand that the system that we have has to create more debt in order for it to continue to work. And if it doesn't, if we actually did pay down our debt to any substantial level, the whole system would collapse in a deflationary collapse, and the whole system would fail. And so that's why, I just kind of laugh because, money just keeps getting created willy-nilly at record paces. Over the last 2 to 3 years, especially when we had COVID, 40% of all the dollars in existence today were created over the last 2 to 3 years. Now, that's mind-blowing for a lot of people, because as the problem gets worse and worse and the system gets bigger and bigger and the debt gets bigger and bigger and bigger, every time we kick the can down the road, it requires more and more debt and more dollars in order to keep the system going. And so that's why when you look at these charts of national debt, it's just going like a hockey stick, right? And so going back to the whole Federal Reserve system and these primary dealer banks that I was talking about, it's basically a glorified IOU swapping. And so if it's kind of like it's a glorified game of Monopoly, in the sense that there really is no value or intrinsic value behind our system other than our faith and confidence. It's our belief system that these green pieces of paper in our pocket actually will buy something and purchase something, because the system we have today is classified as a fiat money system, which basically means that by decree, the government gets to decide this is money and you're going to use it and you got to pay taxes in it. And if you don't, you're going to be in trouble. And so it's being forced upon the people instead of being decided by the free market, and which gold and silver historically were decided by the free market, that this is actually something of intrinsic value, has value. It's limited in supply, takes energy to pull it out of the ground. So it can't just press a button and create it out of thin air. So there was a reason why the founding fathers chose to make gold and silver our form of national money. And even, and I'll jump into that constitutionally here in a minute. But my whole point is, yes, most of the money today is created by fractional reserve banking or bank credits, at the local level or at the regional level, at these conglomerate of banks. But it all starts at the Federal Reserve. And what's crazy is the Federal Reserve that's, creating this money out of thin air by writing these blank checks to buy these bonds. The shareholders of the Federal Reserve earn 6% annually off of this money creation. So, and to add insult or injury to insult or injury to insult, I don't know which way it goes, but to make things worse, we have to spend more of our time, labor, and energy to pay income tax. And people don't know that when the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, so was the IRS, same year. And the reason why the IRS was created was because if you're going to have this system, this debt-based system where you're creating money out of thin air and you owe interest on this new money, you essentially have to the income tax. Most of our income tax is going to pay back the principal plus interest that the federal government owes to the Federal Reserve. And so it's kind of messed up. I mean, I'll pause here and let you ask a question, because I know your wheels are turning here, because I could just keep rambling.
Yeah, no, it's I kind of enjoy that, because all my thoughts are kind of getting jumbled, because I mean, it blows my mind. I grown up like a lot of Southern Okies. I mean, we don't have money,
right?
I mean, we were taught to in order to get more money, you work harder, work more hours. Well, you only have a certain amount of hours.
Right.
And I'm not going to work my life away. And so I've been learning myself, but a lot of times these guys just, they talk over your heads because they're used to talking to money people.
Sure.
But I knew the Federal Reserve wasn't anything what it was called.
Sure.
But the way the government makes it sound, even the fact that they're responding the way they are makes it sound like, well, we could end up getting into a complete depression and complete economic collapse.
Sure.
Because of it. And I personally feel that the reason is because they're trying to get over to cryptocurrency.
Yeah, well, so the inevitable crash of the system, failure of our monetary system, is inevitable. So regardless of whatever conspiracy theory people believe in, I look at history and I look at trends. So people are like, oh, Nasara Jasara, or they'll talk about, oh, Bitcoin, is the devil, or, oh, central bank digital currencies are going to be coming. Like, there's a bunch of narratives out there, and it's important to know how each one of the narratives work, or each one of the systems work, in order to decide which way you're going to go as this all unfolds. Because even though I am a believer that there are white hats and black hats at play, I think a lot of it is going to be decided by, what's out there people are aware of, because a lot of times people are just naive, and when a carrot is dangled in front of them, they're going to take it and they're not going to ask questions, because they're usually there's going to be a panic, there's going to be chaos, and people are just going to look for a solution. And whoever seems to have the best solution, they're just going to take it and not ask questions because it fixes their problems, right? Well, the reason why I believe that the crash is coming, or the reset of the monetary system is coming, is because when you look at the average lifespan of any country that has held the title of world reserve currency, which America currently has the title of world reserve currency, if you go back all the way to the year 1450, you'll notice that every country that has held that title held it for about 80 to 90 years. And so America got that title shortly after World War II during the Bretton Woods Agreement. And so if you do the math on that, we're getting towards the end of that average time frame of when America or when a country has the world reserve currency. The other macro trend to look at is when we have a fiat currency, which is printed out of thin air with really no intrinsic value other than faith and confidence. When you have a system like that, and when it's, in our system became that in 1971 to its full extent, you look at the average lifespan and it usually doesn't go beyond 50 years. And so do I believe the crash may happen overnight? Do I believe the crash is going to happen gradually throughout a course of a couple of years? I don't really know the answer, because I do think that there will be some significant events that happen quite quickly that are going to change the perception, and it's going to motivate people to gravitate towards things that will preserve their purchasing power in the future and also maybe allow freedom. But the government and the banks and the people at the elite are going to try to usher in some kind of solution so they can maintain control, because it's order out of chaos is usually the theme, And so I watch what's going on, and I think whether it's this month or whether it's next year, we will continue to have more and more problems when it comes to our financial system, because we are getting towards the end of its lifespan. And so when you look at world government organizations like the IMF, or you look at what is it? I got it in my notes. I'm blanking on it. World Economic Forum, right? Yeah. So the IMF and the World Economic Forum, they're all talking about, hey, we need another Bretton Woods moment, or hey, we need a great reset. And so this thought is already in people's minds that the system is coming to an end. It's just that the people who are not paying attention, there is hope. Just because we're talking doom and gloom and we're talking about historical trends and we're talking about the potential of this happening, which I don't really think it's a potential. I actually think it's inevitable, my personal opinion. In the Great Depression, there were more millionaires made than any time than in the Great Depression. And that was because if you knew how to position yourself correctly on the other side of this trade, you could benefit greatly. Because the truth is, wealth is never destroyed. It is simply transferred. And so if you don't know how wealth and money works and how that transfer process happens, because a lot of times it happens right underneath your nose, because the Federal Reserve has, stated on their website, that, their goal has been historically 2% inflation every single year. Well, what does that mean? 2% inflation. Well, that means 2% of your money losing value every single year. And so people are wondering, if you go back to when we actually had some form of hard money back in the 50s, 60s, one parent could have a nice job and they could have 2 cars and a house and not have a whole lot of financial pressure. Now you got to have mom, dad, and brother, pulling in income just to, have 1 car and a house, so you got, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And people are wondering why every year passes, it's harder to keep my head above water. Why does it seem that I just get more and more in debt? Because our system is designed, the way our system is designed, the debt-based system, the fiat money system is designed to enslave us. And that is why, one of the reasons why the founding fathers were so big proponents of sound money is because during the Revolutionary War, we had the Continental Dollar. And the Continental Dollar hyperinflated to the point to where it was not worth a Continental, if you've ever heard that phrase. Yeah. And they realized, we don't want to do this again. We want to make sure that, money should be, in fact, let me talk about this for a minute. There's a difference between currency and money. And there's only one significant difference between the two. And that is, money is a medium of exchange, a unit of account, portable, durable, divisible, fungible, which basically means it's interchangeable. And then the final trait is store of value. If the money that you're using cannot store value over a long period of time, then it's not really a money, it's a currency. Because currency is going to bleed, right? But money, you're going to maintain your purchasing power, or your purchasing power is going to increase over time. And so the tools that we have today, like the dollar, it's not a good tool for storing value because it bleeds purchasing power and energy every single year. Any thoughts, questions?
Sorry, I'm so low on the totem pole when it comes to this conversation.
No. It's okay.
I'm sitting there thinking, I was like, well, that it actually makes perfect sense. Why gold and silver would be a standard, because it doesn't deplete that. People have been saying this for, as long as I can remember, buy silver, buy gold, because even if, the shit hit the fan and we lost everything, you'd still be wealthy.
Correct. And that's, you look at what, maybe great grandma, great grandpa, or grandma and grandpa did was, a lot of times they would stash, gold and silver in their walls or in their safes or whatever. And it was, they were trained to believe that this was money, and it is a good form of money. And the reason why it's a good form of money is because what makes something a fair form of money is the question that we need to ask. And that question is answered by this. In order for something to be a fair form of money, both the user of money and the producer of money have to use time, labor, and energy to either bring it into existence or work for it, right? And right now, me and you, we work for these green pieces of paper that we're spending our time, labor, energy, and resources for. But yet this private central bank that has shareholders that's been given a permission to counterfeit money gets to press a button, and the people closest to the money spouts get that money first. And by the time it trickles down to you and I, the marketplace has realized, oh, there's more money in the system, so now prices have to go up. And so the guys at the top who got that money first got to buy assets and things with it before prices started going up. And because inflation, and that's essentially what inflation is the increase of money supply. And usually it takes 18 to 24 months for inflation to really start to kick in once that new money has entered the marketplace. But when you look at when you look at velocity of money, which basically means, it's new money circulating in the system, people start to realize, well, there's more dollars here, so I got to raise my prices here. Things are getting expensive. But like I said, by the time that money usually gets to us, it's too late. And so we didn't get the advantage of, buying stuff on the cheap, like the government and the big banks and the big corporations again, I'm not against capitalism. I love capitalism, but the system we have today is not true capitalism. It is crony capitalism, where a select few are given favoritism.
I think a lot of people don't understand it, because I see a lot of anti-capitalist people that turn socialist because people naturally latch onto something. Most people, instead of saying they're agnostic because they don't have a belief system, they say they're atheist,
right? Because
that's what they know, even though they actually do believe something could be there.
Sure.
But same thing with forms of government. People, I don't like capitalism because I don't like the fact that this guy's rich and I'm not.
Right.
And, like he had a better advantage. He might have had an advantage, but it's not an advantage that you couldn't find.
Sure.
But a lot of, well, I guess would you explain a lot more, if you can, the difference between capitalism and crony capitalism? Because a lot of people don't know the difference.
Yeah. I mean, capitalism is essentially anybody gets to participate. Anybody gets to decide how they're going to live their life, their business, what they want to buy, how they want to buy it, when they want to buy it. And so there's a lot of, at the core of capitalism, it's really freedom, and you're just letting human nature play out, right? But crony capitalism is, because we all want, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. We all want property, but my desires are going to be different than yours, right? And so essentially, I might go out in the world and try to get something that I want that I think is going to make me happy, or produce something that's going to solve a problem for somebody. But it's going to be different for a lot of different people. And so with crony capitalism, it's got flavors of that. But the only difference is you've got this big government at the top that is setting regulations, and those companies that have gotten to benefit from special regulations or standards that were set by the government. Because what's happening is in crony capitalism, the government is now saying, we don't necessarily believe in the true nature of the free market. In fact, we have to create new regulations and red tape and put processes and procedures into place that if you don't meet these requirements, then you can't get the benefits that these other guys or these other companies can receive. And so essentially what happens is you start creating a quasi-capitalistic system in which you've got winners and losers. And what happens is you have like the small guy, right? The innovator, the guy that wants to disrupt the system. He's got a new great idea. He's going to try to get capital. He's going to try to build a business. He's going to try to do all these things.
Tesla.
Yeah, he's going to take a risk, right? And I would say that a lot of times these smaller guys, they've got a whole lot more red tape to jump through or jump over or hoops to jump through because of all these regulations that were set by the government in order to, quote unquote, keep people safe or protected or whatever you want to classify it as. But what happens is in order to play in the sandbox, these smaller guys have to hire lobbyists and attorneys and other overhead expenses in order to just meet the requirements to play in the sandbox. Yeah. And so what happens is there becomes this moat effect, which is built around these sandboxes. That's, the guys who are already in the sandbox, who were lucky enough to work with the government early on, have basically built these moats around these sandboxes. And they get to continue to work with the government. They've got the money to pay for the lawyers and the lobbyists and all this stuff and pay off the politicians and the donations. And what happens is when all this red tape gets set, a lot of times these innovators or these new guys who are trying to disrupt the status quo aren't able to do it because they don't maybe have the connections or the resources in order to play in the sandbox. And so you got a huge hurdle in front in order to do so. And so as somebody who is a little bit more libertarian minded, I don't believe in playing favorites. And so I think that, having all of these extra regulations to quote unquote keep people safe is going to make it harder for innovators to innovate.
It's harder to keep people safe if you're not allowing people to show you new ways to
exactly
be safe.
Yeah.
We're probably one of the most dangerous countries when it comes to buying food.
Sure.
I mean, everything we eat and drink is poison.
Sure.
I mean, it's crazy because just margarine itself it was never intended to be a substitute for food of any kind. It was actually killing chickens. And so what does margarine do? Hey, let's get with the FDA, the government,
right,
and sign an agreement to say that this should be in your diet.
Right.
That's capitalism, crony capitalism is in not just the business market like we think business market, because business is everything. Right. Everything involves business. So that means because there's so much red tape, you can't hardly do anything. I mean, just try building a house in a town, any town. I mean, every town has its own red tape that doesn't even make sense. Right. What you mean? I can't build a fence like this. It has to be down here. Right. Like, from the small to the largest. And I just, in that way, I am libertarian, but I'm just like in religion and everything. I don't fall into any specific, but it's stopped a lot of people because most people are small thinkers. Sure. They think they're big thinkers, but they're kind of small because they only follow what they agree with. And because of that, they only seem to go one direction. Sure. And they don't realize, well, here's some good ideas too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, so when it came to capitalism, there are people right now that are marching saying, let's get rid of capitalism. Sure. Completely. And, and I know people that are hoping that the financial market collapses simply because of that.
Yeah. I mean, I hope it collapses not because of that. I hope it collapses because it's a twisted and demonic system that needs to come down because it's not fair money. It's not sound money. It's a slave system. And what I mean by slave system is, again, I'm not against capitalism. It's just that money is such an important element to our everyday lives. It's representing our energy force. And like I said, if that energy force is not decentralized and is compromised, then it is going to be a hazard to our own freedoms and choices and liberties in life. And I just, again, the monetary system we have now is a crony capitalistic system in the sense that the money has been given, like the people who get to create the money is an elite group of people who are basically given a license to counterfeit. And so, that in itself, and here's what's crazy is, how I said that the shareholders of the Federal Reserve earn 6% off of that money creation every year. Well, the shareholders of the Federal Reserve, most of them are those big primarily dealer banks that are the middleman who are buying those government bonds and turning them around and selling them back to the Federal Reserve. So it's a giant incest pool of, banking elites that are basically controlling our life force. And again, I sound like a giant conspiracy theorist here, but it's really, it's like in the Bible says, love of money is the root of all evil. It's not money itself, but it's the love of money. Right. And so, cause money is the grease in the wheels. It's the energy that keeps this world moving. And so like when people always talk about, politics is downstream from culture. In other words, culture is going to dictate what politics looks like 10 years from now, right? Well, what dictates culture? What changes culture? Money, right? So if you got an elite group of people that get to create money out of thin air and get the purchasing power of those benefits first, well, they kind of get to set the direction of things. Yeah. And so when you look at the founding fathers, the Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution, it basically gives Congress the power to coin money, regulate the value thereof and of foreign coin, fix the standard of weights and measures. And Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution says that no state government shall coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payments of debt. And the thing we got to realize is when the Constitution was being ratified, there was a great debate about whether the federal government was going to be able to issue bills of credit, which is basically fiat money, a unit of debt, right? And it was decided not to put into the Constitution because it was in the government before the Constitution. Why am I blanking on the I don't know why I'm blanking on this, but anyway, so my point is though, with this conversation and with this point is that people are like, okay, well, Matt, if the federal government is not allowed to emit bills of credit, then these green pieces of paper are bills of credit. How is that possible? Well, that's because we gave a central bank the authority, private entity, to create these bills of credit, which we then use. So it was kind of a roundabout way of entering bills of credit. Because if you look at what dollar bills said in like the 50s, you'd say silver certificate, redeemable for gold. You could actually go to the bank, and these were just pieces of paper that represented silver and gold that was in the bank. Yeah. And you could go and redeem those pieces of paper for that silver and gold, which is the real money, right? But most people don't know that today. Here's another fun fact. Because Article 1, Section 10 in the U.S. Constitution states that no state government shall coin money, emit bills of credit, or make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payments of debts. So if you think about it, what is a debt owed, right? So a tax, like when a tax is levied against us, is that a debt owed to the state?
I would think it is.
Yeah, it is. And so if the Constitution says that nothing but gold and silver coin should be a tender in payments of debts, every state tax that is collected in Federal Reserve notes is unconstitutional. State governments should only be collecting taxes in gold and silver because that is what the Constitution says. It kind of, when people think about it, they're like, oh man, I didn't really know all this stuff. It's quite a surprise, but the rabbit hole goes really deep.
Yeah. I've researched, which I have not researched it as much because I only have so many minutes throughout the day to research things. And right now I've been researching spirituality, but I have observed that there are, and this has come from law enforcement, there are a lot of laws, a lot of things that governments do that's not constitutional, but they get away with it because, well, nobody gets onto them for it. I mean, that's simply it. It's like nobody. I mean, look at what happened when Biden said the thing about the rental problem in California.
Right.
I don't care about the Constitution.
Right.
You know, he's going to do what he was on. The guy, the sheriff, which God bless, I can't believe somebody actually said this out loud when arrested pastors. The sheriff was like, he was asked by Tucker, you know, what about the Constitution? He's like, well, we didn't actually think about the Constitution. What? Like, it's literally the main law of the land. I don't care what law you have at all. If it violates the Constitution, therefore it is not a law. It's not valid. We cannot use it. But income tax, there's a lot of things in our system of government right now that's crony.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, it doesn't. If you have money, you win cases, you win things. You automatically get away with stuff. You don't spend prison time for stuff. Right. I mean, I remember in the 90s, there's two vice presidents, Tyson Foods, that got sentenced to prison because they were letting chicken waste go into the Illinois. Right. Backtrack it to 1980. Hillary Clinton puts $1,000 into the stocks of Tyson. Next year, it's worth over $100,000. Sure. Which was, I mean, that's just like great. I've never seen somebody go gambling and do that. Right. And then fast forward, 20 years, and that happens, and then Bill Clinton pardons them. Right. And that's the way the government works. That's the way society. If you get in trouble with breaking the law, you go to trial or go to court. If you don't pay for your attorney, you're going to get an attorney that works for the same person the prosecutor works for. Sure. I mean, you're everything's stacked against us. Sure. But it doesn't have to be. I mean, people's got to open their eyes up. But why should we open eyes up? We can't keep getting candy and free things. And I mean, we're so busy paying attention. We only read headlines now. Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, what's funny is that people didn't, like with this whole Silicon Valley Bank thing. I'm going to read this to you. This is very interesting. Most people don't know this, but so let's see here. Signature Bank. Let's see. We didn't talk about Signature Bank. Okay. Just in case you were bad at your job, Silicon Valley Bank's chief administrative officer, Joseph Gentile, was the former CFO of Lehman Brothers. And not only that, but do you remember Enron? Yeah. Right? He was also involved with Enron. And so this guy has quite the paper trail of screwing things up, because I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of suspicious. Let's just put it that way. Well, it doesn't matter what you know. It matters who you know. I know, right? I mean, you can get away with anything. I mean, look at our government. I mean, Feinstein has a driver for 20, 30 years that was working for the Chinese government as a spy. Nothing happened to her. Right. What's his name? I forgot his name, but he was basically over all of state secrets, and his committee and he was a committee leader, and he was sleeping with a Chinese spy. Right. Nothing happens to him. Why? Because it's who he knows. Right. Exactly. He stayed in power as long as the person in power was close to him. Yep. And that's the way everything seems to work. And I kind of, it's scary. To me, change is scary. Sure. And that's natural for everybody. Because like, what do we do? I know that if you put me out in the middle of nowhere, I'm going to survive. Sure. But put me in a city, I don't know. I mean, I keep enough freedom seeds to keep people away a little bit, but and that's the thing is that, people that aren't as wise about this, when they're talking about cryptocurrency, I'm like, I can barely turn my computer on. Sure. What the heck is a cryptocurrency? Would you mind kind of going into that? Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So cryptocurrency is a widely used term that is often used as an umbrella term to describe many different things.
And really what makes something a true cryptocurrency is going back to that definition of money and currency that I talked about, those key differences there. But really let's take a look at the first cryptocurrency that was ever created, which there were ones prior to Bitcoin, but they weren't successful. So let's just say the first successful one, which was Bitcoin. And the reason why it was successful is because there were so many elements that were already at play, invented, that people just was like Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin, was like, oh, I like this. That works. I'll put it together. That solves that problem. And essentially what Satoshi Nakamoto did, whether it was him or a group of people, created a software, which is basically a glorified ledger, right? Okay. If you think about a book, right, an old fashioned ledger book, right? And each one of these pages has entries of who bought what and when and how much it was, right? Like each page is going to be an entry of transactions, right? Well, things like Bitcoin use a technology called blockchain technology. And essentially what blockchain technology is, imagine this ledger book is the same book reproduced a million times on a million different computers, right? And this ledger book is being updated at the same time every 10 minutes around the world. And so essentially what blockchain technology and Bitcoin did was that it created digitally scarce information for the first time ever. So a lot of times when we think about digital information, we think we can copy and paste it and it can be reproduced over and over and over again. That's why we don't really assert a lot of value to digital information. But with the way this technology works, it actually created scarce and original digital data that can't be reproduced, and just based off of how it works. And so that's really the innovation behind Bitcoin and blockchain technology. And since Bitcoin was successful, there's been other people who had other ideas on how to maybe possibly improve upon it or do different functionalities, because since this is essentially a ledger program that's keeping track of transactions, you could essentially issue company stock or debt on a blockchain, and that way it'd be provable and original and scarce. And then also you could do what they're calling NFTs, which is basically a digital representation of ownership of maybe some kind of art form. So like, for instance, I could go to a museum and take a picture of the Mona Lisa. But if I don't have that unique identifier on the blockchain that shows that I'm the owner of that Mona Lisa, it's not going to, it's really just authenticating who the actual owner is.
Yeah. I've heard that NFTs, somebody kind of gave me a small explanation, could be right, could be wrong. But they said that what makes NFTs special, why people buy these little bitty pictures and they're buying them for $1 million, is because of the information that's on them. That you could have information that automatically gets you the phone number of Elon Musk, that you could have friends because he's part of that.
Sure.
But that's, as far as I know, I mean, it sounds interesting, but it sounds like, why would I want their numbers? But there are people that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and yeah, because let's go back to Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is above and beyond any other cryptocurrency out there. And the reason why I say it is not because it's the fastest cryptocurrency network. And I'm not saying that because it's got all the bells and whistles. Really, when you want something to be a form of money, you want it to be slow and stupid. You want it to be safe, right? You want it to be simple. And Bitcoin is often joked about being the boomer coin, just because, it was not only the first one, but it's essentially acting like a digital form of gold in this new digital ecosystem. And Bitcoin obviously has the largest market cap when it comes to value. It has the most users, the most wallets. And what people don't realize is with Bitcoin, you don't actually ever hold the Bitcoin in your phone or your computer or your hardware wallet, which you use to keep it safe. The Bitcoin exists on these millions of computers around the world on this ledger. And what you're protecting is a private key. And that private key is the information that you need in order to move that wealth across this digital ledger system across the millions of computers, right? And so you have a public key and a private key. The public key, you could put it on a billboard and receive payments because it's just kind of like an address, right? Yeah. And whereas the private key is the tool that allows you to move those funds across this ecosystem, this ledger system, right? And so really what's important is to keep that private key safe, whether it be on your phone or on your computer or your hardware wallet. I always just recommend a hardware wallet. That's the safest way to do it, because you want to have something that's not connected to the internet and is basically just sending a signal back and forth from the wallet itself to the platform that you're using to initiate the transaction. So there's a lot that goes into it, but essentially Bitcoin is using cryptography and something called SHA-256 algorithm. And the reason why people are like, oh, well, isn't Bitcoin just, digital, just a digital number, and how does it really have any intrinsic value? Well, okay, Matt, you said Bitcoin is limited in supply based off how blockchain technology works. It can't be copied, right? It can't be reproduced illegitimately. But what makes that possible is this thing called Bitcoin mining. It's a mining process. So you've got, and this is where I'm going to get kind of technical here. You have the miners and you have the full node operators. And so what happens is these miners are all around the world and they're all plugging in. Anybody can be a miner. Anybody can download a wallet. Anybody can run a full node. That's the beautiful thing about Bitcoin. Is you don't need permission. You don't need to ask anybody permission. You don't need to give any personal information to participate in the system. You could be, because everything is pseudo-anonymous, which basically means that you're not giving up personal information to necessarily become a Bitcoin miner or a full node operator or even to open up a wallet. And it's a peer-to-peer system where Bitcoin is not only a form of money, but also a payment system. So, the reason why it's hard for people to wrap their minds around Bitcoin is because there's a lot that's going into this. But going back to the whole mining aspect of Bitcoin, Bitcoin is emulating a digital form of gold. And what do I mean by that? Is when you go out and mine for gold, you're using time, labor, and energy to pull gold out of the ground. And so essentially people could say, oh, it's that sweat equity. It's that energy that you use to pull gold out of the ground to represent that energy. Because essentially what gold is a form of money that's representing your life force, right? And that's essentially what Bitcoin is doing, but in a digital form. So instead of mining for gold, these Bitcoin miners are plugging into large power sources and they're using large amounts of power in order to solve mathematical equations or the SHA-256 algorithm. And whichever computer successfully solves that algorithm first gets rewarded with newly minted Bitcoin. And people are like, oh, well, okay, that makes sense. It's kind of emulating gold's mining process. But what dictates how many Bitcoins there are going to be? And so what's beautiful about Bitcoin is because it's an open source software, any developer or engineer can go in and look at its code and be like, oh, I see what it's doing. That's kosher. That's good. And so you can literally audit you can not only audit every transaction, but you can audit the code. And so when you audit the code, you can actually see that nothing bad is going on here. You've had thousands of developers look at Bitcoin's code and be like, oh, yeah, this makes sense. It's all out in the open. I can read it. I can see it functioning in real time. And so, there's really, it's a system in which you don't have to trust, you can actually verify. Whereas if I were to go to the Federal Reserve, knock on their doors and say, show me your books, they'd be like, get out of here, punk. Yeah. You're not going to see those numbers. But with Bitcoin, because the system is transparent and the code, everything, when Satoshi Nakamoto released Bitcoin into the wild, the code was set, right? And so how do you implement changes to the code of Bitcoin? Well, you have to at least have a developer submit a code change. That code change is going to be vetted by people who are running miners and also running full nodes. And you're going to have to get at least 98% of that network or the 98% of the participants to agree to adopt that new change. And so when somebody's like, oh, well, theoretically, you can increase the supply of Bitcoin. And I said, well, yeah, theoretically, you can if a developer submitted a code to increase the supply of Bitcoin, but you got to get 98% of the network to agree to adopt that change. And if you don't, it fails. Well, what person in their right mind who is in Bitcoin would adopt this new code change that would increase the supply of Bitcoin? They wouldn't, because you would actually be devaluing your own holdings. So there's a financial and economic system or incentive for them not to do it. So the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is it's a bottom approach or bottom up approach instead of a top down approach to a monetary system. It's more democratic in its nature, which it's got a high threshold for changes to ever be implemented. And that's why Bitcoin as a form of money is so important, is because not only because it's so hard to change, but it's also people don't realize this, but the Bitcoin network with all of its combined computing power is the strongest computing network in the world. Just in 2014 alone, and the 2014 was a long time ago. In 2014 alone, Bitcoin's computing power was greater than the top 500 supercomputers combined. Wow. And people go, well, what if nation states want to attack the Bitcoin network? Okay, well, they could, but it's going to be very evident what they're doing, and people are going to notice that, and people who are participating in the network are going to do what they call a hard fork to the code, which basically means this new code adoption is going to basically this new code that gets adopted by the network would basically make all of the efforts that these governments were trying to do irrelevant, because not only would you see the governments buying in large sums these ASIC miners, these special machines that are used to run the mining process on Bitcoin, but they're going to have to use a large sum of power, because essentially it's the power that is also protecting the Bitcoin network, in the sense that they call it a 51% attack. So in order to mess up this ledger process or do a double spend or to compromise the network, you would have to have 51% of the whole entire network, 51% of the whole entire network, and maintain that power consumption and processing power for over an hour, 10 minutes, like 10 minutes to an hour, because every new block of transactions comes out every 10 minutes. But really, you want to be able to maintain it for at least an hour. But the thing is that the Bitcoin network currently uses more power than the entire country of Sweden. So if a nation state wanted to do a 51% attack on Bitcoin's network, they'd have to shut down their entire country's power consumption, or a large portion of the power consumption of that country, and maintain that power consumption and have it dedicated towards the Bitcoin network for an extended period of time. And that's just not feasible. So Bitcoin is great because the larger it grows, the more protected it becomes. And it's like a virus that you can't kill. Because, what's interesting about the Bitcoin ledger is, even if the government was successful in stopping Bitcoin or the network itself, as long as one version of the ledger still exists, it can reproduce itself 1,000 times over. So so maybe the government goes after all these miners, or they go after the full node operators. Well, as long as there's one copy of the program still in existence, you can upload it and everything's back. You can reproduce itself, like I said, 1,000 times over. So sure, with the dollar value or the purchasing power drop, if it was under attack like that, yeah, most likely. But again, there has to be, there's a lot that goes into compromising the network when it comes to overall money, power, like power consumption, that when you look at risk to reward ratio, there's just not, I mean, it would have to be all out warfare in order for governments to shut down Bitcoin.
Yeah, now, of course, Bitcoin is not the only cryptocurrency. I have heard recently, and of course, there's a lot of conspiracy theories, and a lot of them are, most conspiracy theories are based on some sort of fact. Most, that our government has actually been working on building their own currency. And the fear of that is that they would essentially, they could invoke a social credit score.
Oh yeah.
They could, if they decide that we don't want you to spend money anymore, you're shut off, you're completely broke because you didn't vote the right way or because you said something wrong. Yep. What separates that from Bitcoin? Can you do that with Bitcoin?
No. So Bitcoin is an entirely different beast altogether. So because Bitcoin is decentralized, in other words, there's no central party, person, government, company that controls Bitcoin. So like I said, anybody can participate in the network. You don't need permission. But this is why on my radio show, I try to tell people the difference between how Bitcoin works versus how a central bank digital currency would work or how a national government's currency would work. So the difference is Bitcoin is being maintained by millions of people around the world running a full version of the ledger, a full node, or whether they're mining it, right? And it's a peer-to-peer system. So in other words, if I have a wallet and you have a wallet, we can do a transaction and we don't need a bank or a middleman to be involved in that process. Whereas a central bank digital currency, they might create a digital ledger like Bitcoin, but who are the people that get to maintain the ledger system, the full nodes, or a mining process if it even has one? Well, the government or maybe a select few elite
back to
banks,
crony capitalism.
Going back to the crony capitalism, right? They want to maintain control because if you can control the full nodes and you can control the mining process, you can control the network. And so essentially they're going to try to sell the public on a central bank digital currency. And this is coming. This will be a thing. And so I am out there shouting from the rooftops, understand the difference in how these systems work, because with Bitcoin, anybody can download the software, mine it, run a full node, whatever. But if it's a government or a central bank digital currency, there's only going to be the bankers or the governments who get to run that software. You just get to be a participant in that software. You don't actually get to vote or have a say in how that network works.
So they basically they redid the Federal Reserve, except instead of privatizing it, they made it where they have all the power and they actually have more power because they don't have to depend on anything from anybody. They just say, hey, this is how much this is worth. This is what you get. Sorry, right. This is your rations for the week, simply because you voted wrong.
Yeah. I mean, so like, for instance, I've had a lot of talks with community bankers. Community bankers don't even like the idea of a central bank digital currency. They actually prefer Bitcoin over it because a central bank digital currency means that all banking services will essentially come from one giant cartel of banks, which is the Federal Reserve banking system. And so what's probably going to happen, I don't know how it's exactly going to play out, but whenever the system does change or whenever they do roll out a central bank digital currency, you're going to wake up one day and they're going to be like, hey, download this app from the Federal Reserve website. And for whatever amount of dollars you currently have in your bank, we're going to give you X amount of these new central bank digital currencies. And the challenge is that it's going to look like free money to a lot of people. And they're going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do that. I'll jump into that boat. And then, like, to your point, if they don't like what you said online, or if they don't like how you voted, or maybe you eat too much chocolate cake, and you're not meeting your health goals, or hey, maybe your carbon footprint's a little too big, or maybe you got a stimulus check and they deposited it in your wallet, but you only have a certain amount of time to spend that money, and you have to spend it on these items only, or that money's going to disappear. So it's going to usher in the possibility for a hell of a lot more control. And they're going to try to sell it as a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, but those who don't understand the differences in how these systems work will easily fall for it. And so I am a proponent of decentralization, in which, you know, going back to that whole idea of anybody can participate, you don't need permission, you don't need to have anybody tell you what to do. Like that's kind of where I want to go. And so as much as I love gold and silver, you know, I can use gold and silver coinage for local transactions. You know, if I'm at a store, if I'm trading with a buddy. But if, let's say, I have a friend in Australia, you know, and I want to do a transaction, well, it's going to be pretty hard for me to send my gold and silver bullion overseas. And so Bitcoin, in my opinion, is probably going to be that black market solution or that roundabout way in order to transact with people globally in a digital form without having to necessarily jump through all these government hoops. And go ahead.
And it just popped in my head that, I mean, I know many reasons why they don't like, the government doesn't like the idea of it. But moreover than that, how are you going to tax or put tariffs or put restrictions on the money that goes in and out of countries? And they don't like that. They hate that idea that we have a world global market. And I'm a very proud American. I am. I'm very strong border walls. I love immigration. I just like responsible immigration. But at the same time, I'm also a humanitarian.
Sure.
I also believe we're in the same world together. We have different cultures, so therefore we need borders.
Right.
Different laws, different rules. But the idea that you can no longer purchase anything from out of the country, even though I'd love everything to be made in America, but unfortunately they make it difficult.
Right.
They make it more, especially now that, we've got our current administration in it. I mean, it's just, we're getting stuff that's just crap.
Right.
If we get it at all.
Well, I don't know if you know this, but the Bitcoin also has a humanitarian effort to it, which is, if you think about it, whether you're in Venezuela or maybe you're in Ukraine, and let's say you have to flee your country due to political persecution or due to war or due to hyperinflation, if you were able to take your local wealth and turn it into Bitcoin and put it in a wallet that you control, you can essentially memorize the backup seed phrase that recovers that wallet. And it's basically like 12 or 24 words. And if you memorize those 12 or 24 words, you can go across any border, any country, with millions, if not billions of dollars of wealth in your head. And by the time you get to your destination, you can buy a new wallet, enter in the seed phrase, and presto, you have instant access to your money again. Try taking $10,000 worth of gold and silver or $10,000 of fiat currency on an airplane or crossing a border. Well, I meant to say over 10,000. Yeah. You're going to be stopped. You're going to be questioned. You're going to be taxed.
10,000 or more, $9,999.99 is the exact number. As a police officer, and I was not for that. I understood the purpose of trying to stop like cartels, stuff like that. But it was way abused. That's when you got a lot of corrupt sheriffs that would stop people, stuff like that, and keep the money. I've seen and I've been a part of them no longer being in office anymore.
Sure.
But the idea that you can't carry your own cash,
right?
You can't. You have to prove that you own the money that you own.
Sure. That
there's something wrong with that because it's anti-freedom. It's anti-constitutional. Sure. I mean, we shouldn't have to prove that I'm innocent. You should have to prove that I'm guilty.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's not the world we live in. We like to say that.
Well, and that's also the argument about Bitcoin too, is because Bitcoin allows me to take such action where I can basically take my life's wealth and leave a country in a matter of minutes and memorize this seed phrase. In fact, or you could just, let's say you had a notepad and you wrote down a poem and you just put the words in a certain order or whatever. Like, you don't even have to memorize it. You could get through customs with large sums of money if you were fleeing a country. But people are like, oh, well, then isn't going to be used by criminals and whatnot. Well, yes, cryptocurrency has been used by criminals. And there's 2 points I want to make on this is whether it's cash, pieces of paper, or whether it's cryptocurrency, or whether it's gold and silver, or whether it's shells, it doesn't matter what kind of tool you're using for money. People are going to do good things and they're going to do bad things with it. And it's criminals are always going to find a way to do something, a roundabout way to do things. And I would just say that Bitcoin is pseudo-anonymous. And what I mean by that is you have a wallet and your wallet has a public and private address, right? Your name doesn't have to be attached to it. Your IP address doesn't have to be attached to it if you know how to use a VPN and all that stuff. But there's ways of being private, but the problem is Bitcoin is an open ledger. So if you leave enough breadcrumbs, detectives, in fact, law enforcement actually prefer people to use Bitcoin for illicit activities over cash. And that's because it's a open, decentralized public ledger where every transaction is recorded. So eventually, if you can find out whose wallet address was used for these illicit activities and you can kind of connect an identity to it, well, then you have a higher likelihood of catching the criminal than you would with, say, maybe paper cash.
Cash is hard, really hard to catch people with.
Right.
Really hard. You have to, I mean, you'd have to take pictures. Like if we're trying to catch somebody, a sting, we'll take pictures of the money to have the serial code and everything on there. That's the only way. It's follow that. Other than that, if you didn't use that money,
right?
Who knows?
Right. And so I would say that, yes, you can use Bitcoin to do illegal activities. Yes, you can use Bitcoin to get around the government, but Bitcoin is a system in which you got to prove that somebody's guilty, right? Yeah. You got to go through the process and to figure out, okay, can we put the dots together? Can we untangle this web of transactions and figure out who this was? And so Bitcoin is not a silver bullet for crime and terrorism, but it is a silver bullet for freedom. So in other words, you can take actions that the government can't stop you the moment that you're taking it. But if you do something illicit and get caught for it, there is a higher likelihood that they can trace it back to you because it is a recorded, open, decentralized ledger. So in my way, I think it's still a beautiful thing because Bitcoin, the government can't just be like, oh, I don't like what you said, I'm going to turn off your wallet. Oh, I don't like the way you voted, I'm going to turn off your wallet. Yeah. Oh, I don't like the way you're living your life, I'm going to turn off your wallet. Like, you can still do things and you can still move around, but a lot of work's going to have to go into figuring out what you were doing with your money. I mean, there's also privacy related cryptocurrencies like Monero that do a phenomenal job of making it entirely impossible. But again, it's one of those things where different cryptocurrencies are used for different things. And Bitcoin is going to be used as a digital gold, a store of value, a reserve world asset. I believe governments and banks will even start buying Bitcoin. In fact, El Salvador uses Bitcoin as legal tender. They're the first country to ever do it. There's other countries that are moving in that direction. But Bitcoin is going to be kind of like this digital gold store of value that people put on their balance sheet as a store of value. And you might see nation states transacting, oil and natural gas transactions in Bitcoin. But it's just an alternative. So like, I believe in Bitcoin, but I also believe in gold and silver. I believe in people's ability to choose what they want to choose for a form of money. And it's always important to diversify. So, because like I said, Bitcoin's going to be used sometimes entirely different than maybe how you would use your gold and silver.
Now, I know a lot of people that said, man, I wish I would have bought Bitcoin back when it was such and such price. I don't, just because I'd be a complete douche and I wouldn't be the same person I am today. So I'm glad I chose being poor for a while, making money and losing all of it. It taught me a lot, because if I would have gotten it because if anybody that would have bought it, like, investing in Google or something when they first started, you're going to be rich. However, the entrance to jump into Bitcoin, I've told, is difficult. I mean, it's expensive.
Well, actually, so each Bitcoin is divisible by 8 decimal points. So I believe that's 100 million. So if you can buy fractions of a Bitcoin, which the smaller unit of a Bitcoin is known as a Satoshi. So like right now, you could buy $1 of Satoshis, which is a small fraction of a Bitcoin. You could buy $10. You could buy $100. You could buy $23,000, which I think is the price that Bitcoin's at right now, as far as for one coin. But that's the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is it's so highly divisible in the sense that it can be utilized in a fractional sense, much better than, let's say, a dollar could be. And so you could do microtransactions, like let's say you had, your home set up in such a way where you're paying, fractional amounts of Bitcoin towards your energy usage or towards whatever it is that you're using in your house. But my point is with this is that there is no, it's very easy to get into Bitcoin with any dollar amount. But the hard part is people learning how to safely use it and store it, that can be the hard part. And that's where I encourage people to reach out to me, and I'll show them how to set up their own wallets and the do's and the don'ts and things to consider. So there is a technical hurdle for people to get into it, but I definitely think it's worth it if you want options in the future, because if we do move to a world where there are central bank digital currencies, that's not necessarily a system that I want to use. And so if I'm going to use a digital form of money, I'm going to use a free market, decentralized, public form of money that is basically going to allow me to live the life that I want without worrying about, these social controls. And even with, the speed of transactions. So usually it takes 10 minutes for a Bitcoin transaction to go through, and it takes about, an hour for it to be finally confirmed, which doesn't mean that, the first 10 minutes it's going to be confirmed, but you give it an hour, 6 blocks, then that means that transaction is not going to change. But the point is that there are second layer solutions in which, let's say you're a coffee shop, and I go into the coffee shop and I open up a payment channel with you on what they call the Lightning Network. Well, let's say I come in every single day to buy a cup of coffee with you. Well, I could do that for weeks on end, and then the coffee shop could eventually close the channel and settle all of those coffee transactions as one single transaction and have it recorded on the blockchain. So what's cool about Bitcoin is I'm not so worried about speed of transactions, because there are solutions that address that issue. And the reason why the network has to be slow like that, where every 10 minutes, a new block of transactions is added to the network, is because of that whole mining process, solving the SHA-256 algorithm. It takes a lot of computing power, and these computers are making millions of guesses at a time to try to solve this. And it takes roughly 10 minutes. And that component in itself, with the energy consumption, the miners, and the full nodes, that's what's protecting the network. And so you don't necessarily want to change that. But there's thousands of cryptocurrencies. And the thing is 90% of them are going to all fail. And when you're wanting something to be money goes through an evolution. When something is becoming a form of money, it's first a collectible. Then it moves into this stage of store of value, which is what Bitcoin's moving into. Then you have medium of exchange. It becomes a medium of exchange in the public. And then after it becomes a medium of exchange, it becomes a true measure of wealth. And that's where I think Bitcoin is on that course, that course. I mean, we're only 13, 14 years into Bitcoin. And so this is a very young ecosystem, a young network that is already the most powerful computing network in the world. And as it grows, it's just going to continue to dominate even more, because here's the thing. There's only going to ever be 21 million Bitcoins in creation ever. 19 million of them have already been created. It's over. It's not until the year 2140 that the last Bitcoin will be mined or created. And so we've got roughly 100 years until until the last Bitcoin is mined. But my point is that if you own one Bitcoin, and Bitcoin grows to be this global reserve, asset, you are going to be some of the wealthiest people in the world just by saying that you own one Bitcoin, because there's only going to ever be 21 million of them. Sure, you can own a fraction of a Bitcoin. You can, and that, but as Bitcoin grows in purchasing power, grows in value, grows in adoption, that one Bitcoin is going to be, it could be worth $10 million worth of purchasing power today. So it's very interesting.
Yeah. My mind is blown, actually. Okay. Because I just never, I looked at it like a lot of people do, as pseudo technology. Right. They're like, didn't understand it. And people that don't understand things make fun of things. Sure. I see plenty of memes out there that make fun of Bitcoin people that buy stuff, but I don't. The only people that I know that that failed at these cryptocurrencies that I'd never even heard of.
Sure, yeah, and that's because you have to get users, you have to get adoption, and the smaller a blockchain is, this is what people don't realize. blockchain technology is the underlying technology behind cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
And the smaller the network is, the more vulnerable it is to hacks and to failure. And so Bitcoin got a head start because it was birthed in a time where nobody knew what it was. Nobody understood it. And you had all these libertarians and computer nerds using it and building the network. And then by the time 2017 rolls around and it starts getting into mainstream media, it's like, oh shit, this is like kind of a big deal. Like, and then it got to the point to where, oh, well, now it's going to be kind of irrelevant for the government to even try to shut it down. And so like a lot of these cryptocurrencies are going to fail just simply because they don't have the users. They don't have the network effect. They don't have the capital or the mind power that's involved in it. And so, yes, some of them will succeed based off of what they're trying to achieve. Because I don't believe in a world where there's just going to be one Bitcoin. There's going to be other cryptocurrencies. I mean, so like, maybe 10 or 20 projects in my opinion, might survive.
I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing either. I mean, because really what we're witnessing with this cryptocurrency revolution is the free market trying to solve problems and trying to present solutions. And some of these networks are going to win. Some of them are going to fail. And some of them are going to be compromised by banks and governments. And some are going to be utilized by banks and governments. But really, you want to look at how they operate. Are they decentralized? Do you need permission? And is it a good form of money? And so I think Bitcoin has kind of already won that battle. I think it's going to be inevitable at some point. But as the world continues to digitize, and this is why I say don't stick your head in the sand, because as the world continues to move more and more to a digital world, it's scary, right? It's scary because you have artificial intelligence, you have governments, you have all of these elements that could dictate more control over your life. But I'm a believer that when there is an opposing force, there's an opposite, right? And so I believe that even if we do move into a world where central bank digital currencies are the prevalent because people are just blindly walking into it and believe in what the government's telling them to do, then, and let's say this brings in this one world government or one world currency or the mark of the beast or whatever it is, I'm a believer that there's going to be a black market. There's going to be alternatives. There's going to be ways to operate outside of that system because, like it's yin and yang, So that's just my personal opinion.
No, I mean, life has proved it. And honestly, I think change usually has soft closes to get people to change. When something just happens right away, it rarely sticks. I mean, look at New World Order. We say it now, but if you're, in your late 30s or 40s, maybe even a little bit younger than that, you remember the wrestling and had the NWO. Yeah. We didn't even have a clue what that meant. Right. But it was getting into your subconscious about New World Order. They were the bad guys, but they were the good guys. I mean, you didn't know what they were. And now you start paying attention. I mean, and things that used to be conspiracies are no longer conspiracies. Remember NSA, not when Obama was in power. I hate saying power when it comes to presidency because it shouldn't be a powerful position. But when he was in and he was asked about the NSA, he's like, no such agency. Right. Never heard of it. Right. And now it's like everybody knows about it. I read a book called The Puzzle Palace about the creation of the NSA, and it'll blow your mind. It'll tell you how corrupt our government is and how what's more corrupt than our government is our military, the military complex. I mean, look, we're dealing with UFOs now, and most of them are not UFOs. Right. And that was said, 70 years ago that this was going to happen. Right. But people don't pay attention. We're headline readers. And if it seems outlandish, it's outlandish, and I mean, everything seems outlandish if you don't know the facts. I mean, oh yeah. By the way, COVID didn't come from a lab. Oh, sorry. Came from a lab. Oh yeah. Yeah. A mask isn't going to work on viruses. Right. Oh wait, no, forget that science before. Now that we have COVID, masks do work. Right. But
question everything.
That's science. Science is questioning everything. And I do. And when I'm told not to question things, that's when I get the clue I need to question it. That's why I started questioning religion.
Right.
Because people would not question it. They're scared to death of it. And I'm like, really? Let me look at this. I'm like, oh, everybody's idiots. We all are.
Sure.
I mean, we're just going to follow what we want to believe. And the way I look at it, if it makes you a better person, why not?
Right.
You know, I don't care what you believe if it's making you a better person and stuff. But when it comes to money and, you know, everybody's talking about the end times. We're talking about we're going to go into encampments. We're going, you know, all these theories. And then on the other side, there's people that nothing's going on. Yeah, I trust the government. Like 40-something% of the country that's been, of course, I've never been part of the review or anything. But, you know, they say 40-something% of the country still trust the government.
Right.
Which I completely do not believe, because I ask people constantly, do you trust our government? You know, they're like, no. I've never heard a yes yet.
Right.
You know, and that's the thing about the cryptocurrency is because people that don't pay attention, they're just going to go with what they quote unquote have to do because they think they have to do it because they don't create options for themselves.
And that's a good point. So we've been brainwashed to believe that the role of money belongs to the government. And I'm a believer that money belongs to the individual. It belongs to the free market. It belongs to the people. And that's why I'm a big fan of like, hey, let's see where the cookie crumbles. Let's see where the dust settles, and let's see what the free market decides is a good form of money. Because at the end of the day, I don't want a handful of people controlling where my money comes from or how it works. And nor do I want them to get the sole benefits of it if they're at the top. And so it needs to be, like I said, decentralized in such a way where there's no permission. Anybody can participate. It's a fair form of money. And what I mean by fair form of money is if you're going to use the system, whether you're working for it or mining it or creating it, you are going to have to spend both time, labor, and energy to participate on either one of those activities. Whereas right now, it's not that way. And so I would just encourage people, buy my book, Foundations for Liberty, on Amazon, and learn about the monetary system, the second half of the book. And you'll hear a lot of these talking points on here, but get familiar digitally as well with what's going on, because the last thing we want is a bunch of sheeple just accepting some new digital form of money that's being rolled out by the government because it's from the government. Everybody has this idea that, oh, well, money belongs to the government. And in reality, the reason why our government grew so large to begin with is because they basically have the power of money. And so like if they were able to move us off the gold standard and allow a central bank to create money out of thin air, they're basically have the ability to continue to grow and grow and grow and grow. That's why governments hate the gold standard. They have to live within their means. They can't just push a damn button and create money to pay for wars we can't afford or social programs we can't afford.
I was just going to say, if our money was totally owned by the government, we wouldn't pay taxes every year. They would give us allotments of the money.
Right.
They'd say, okay, well, here you go. We're keeping this much because we own the money. They wouldn't even need money, to be honest, because they own all the money. I own the money anyway. You know, it's people like to put things simple when it's complicated, and they'll complicate things when they're simple. Sure. You know, and I think money, it should be a simple idea. It should be, you know, what's something worth? Well, what somebody will pay for. Right. I mean, it's as simple as that. But our government they will use, and it's human nature when put in power separate from, like, when you're controlling somebody else's money, you don't care about that money as much. Right. You know, and when they learn that, well, they only get a certain amount of money in their pockets, well, let's hire lobbyists. Let lobbyists pay for us. Let certain people give us money and stuff. We shouldn't even have lobbyists. I mean, that right there, I don't know why people never argue about that. Oh, let's have term limits. Get rid of lobbyists.
I think my solution is pretty simple, and you may disagree with it, which is fine, which is government is simply only one purpose. That is to protect our rights, our right to life, liberty, and property.
Yeah.
Anything outside of that, that's when stuff gets messy.
No, I agree with that. I go head to head with some libertarians about some things, but not all things.
Right.
You know, it's kind of like there's some things liberals that believe that I'm completely okay with. I don't have a problem with. The things, you know, I've had friends that completely believe that there should not be a police department,
Sure.
that we shouldn't have law enforcement. Well, the problem is then, you know, the strongest wins.
Sure.
All the time.
Sure. And
when, you know, and it can't always be that way.
Right.
You know, somebody's got to be able to protect that person.
Yeah, and that goes back to my whole point, in which I'm a firm believer that government was established to basically be to help be the referee, in the sense that its sole objective is protection of the nation, but also our rights of life, liberty, and property, in pursuit of happiness. But it's very simple. Just get out of people's lives, get out of the way. And if somebody's rights are being infringed upon, then the government can step in, if I haven't already shot them already.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. A lot of people, I've heard even libertarians say this, and politicians are bad about saying our democracy.
Yeah.
What the hell is a democracy? I was like, are we the Salem witch trials? I was like, that's what a democracy is. It's where majority of the world, we would still have a slave society. Not, I mean, other than what we already have, but I mean, a literal slave society would be okay in America because a majority of people believed it.
Right.
You know, you don't need a majority. We are a constitutional republic, which means that we have representatives that are restricted based on this constitution that says, here's what you can't do.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, we can do this. A Bill of Rights, inalienable. Like I've got slack for this one, is that I don't care if you're a terrorist. You were born with certain inalienable rights. Sure. You know, I don't care if you're an illegal. You were born with certain inalienable rights. You have to have due process, stuff like that. And, you know, January 6th, you know, I've said it before, and I've been saying it since that day. I was there. That the reason why they call it an insurrection is because because the Patriot Act from 9/11. Sure. You know, and it's constantly taking away our rights. And to get full circle back, the monetary system is another way they've discovered that they tried controlling us with money, but it wasn't working. You know, they could only control a certain amount. But if they were to go to a digital currency that's separate from Bitcoin, they would control everything. 100% of our income would be controlled by a group of people. I don't care if they're on our side right now. They're not always going to be.
Right. And they can tax you instantly too, you know, so, but it's again, governments and central banks are already planning it. I mean, these are headlines from 2019, and there's plethora of other ones out there of, you know, banks and governments talking about this. But, you know, you've got JP Morgan creates their own digital coin for payments. Banning cash, so you pay the bank to hold your money, is what the IMF wants. Bank of America CEO says company wants a cashless society. Wells Fargo to pilot a dollar-linked stablecoin for internal settlement. And then you've got, this one's from The Guardian. Mark Carney, dollar is too dominant and could be replaced by a digital currency. Washington Post, why China's rushing to mint its own digital currency, which they have. And then top Federal Reserve officials says that the U.S. Central Bank is actively debating and looking at and studying a digital version of the dollar. And here, fun fact, get this. I don't know if you know this, but during COVID, when the first big relief package came, those trillions of dollars, I think it was like $6 trillion. Yeah. In the original legislation before it was passed, was wording in there to create a new crypto digital dollar, and it got removed before it was passed. So this language is already lined up. It's not going to come tomorrow. It's here today. Yeah. They're just looking for the perfect opportunity to usher it in.
I've friends on, or a friend on the inside that's a certain organization that has said that they've already tested it. It's actually public that they've tested it. Most of us don't hear about it. Right. I mean, you know, it's kind of like the news. I don't actually watch the news. I haven't for years because I learned in law enforcement that the news lies.
Sure.
So I don't get the purpose of it. But because people don't watch it, they watch headlines, and if the headlines we only see is social media, and social media are ran by certain people that are in bed with the government. Actually, I think it's the government that's in bed with them.
Sure.
Because I think that, honestly, I personally believe there are certain social media outlets that were created by the government.
Sure. Yeah.
Which would only make sense. And that's why
I think it was the CIA or the NSA that their investment arm invested in Facebook. I think it was one of them.
Yeah. It's kind of ironic that the year that Mark Zuckerberg decided to create Facebook, there was a social media outlet that the government was trying to build, and they scrapped it, and it was just like Facebook. And then Mark Zuckerberg comes up.
Yeah.
But like you said earlier about how they learned how to bypass certain rules and laws. Well, not rules, laws and constitutionalities by going through a third party.
Exactly.
They've been doing that for years. The government learned that a long time ago in the 1940s when they actually discovered. And it's funny. It's kind of funny to me that people think it's sci-fi when you talk about UFOs, stuff like that. I'm like, how is that? Have you seen how large our world is?
Right.
I was like, and how much evidence there is. I've personally seen things.
Sure. Yeah.
How can I say whether they were, terrestrial or not? No, I can't. But they learned back then. Oh, well, we'll get Skunk Works to work on it.
Sure. Because
if they work on it, we don't have to tell anybody anything.
Right.
Freedom of Information Act does not pertain to a third party. It's only to the government.
Sure.
And so they learn, if you want to keep a secret, have somebody else, and they will do what you say because they don't want to become unalive.
And who's that somebody else? Usually it's some kind of patsy they put in there to that they've got control over.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
Yeah.
It's just the world is going to crap, but I mean, it doesn't have to be. I mean,
sure.
I'm not an optimist. I'm a realist that seems kind of optimistic.
That's fair. That's fair.
But that's because I do see that we have control over our own destination.
Sure.
If we don't like something, don't do it.
Right.
It's just get up, make the decisions that will get you in this direction. If you can't afford, if you think, Bitcoin sounds like a good idea, but I can't afford this much, start putting this little bit amount in.
Yeah. I mean, you gotta start somewhere. And a lot of people will argue, well, I'm not a big fan of this, digital world and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, if you want to go try to live off the grid, do it. That's fine. It's your choice. If you want to try to operate in the world in a manner that's going to still allow you to maximize your freedom, then you might learn about cryptocurrencies. And then I've had people say like, okay, well, all this is fun and dandy, but what happens if there's a solar flare or something and the grid goes down? And I'm like, listen, if the grid goes down, if there's a solar flare, an EMP attack, whatever it is, first of all, it's most likely not going to be a global event. It's going to be a regional event or, half of the globe. And like I said, with Bitcoin, as long as there's one copy of the ledger out there, you can eventually, if you survive the EMP attack, you can eventually get your money back. But at the end of the day, if there's an EMP attack or a solar flare, the banking system as is today, along with Bitcoin, along with anything else, is all going to be gone, and the only precious metal you're going to care about is lead and food. Yeah. And at that point, like, who cares?
Yeah. Yeah. I try to save up as much freedom seeds as I can. Because I've learned if you don't call them freedom seeds, you can get censored.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So did I say precious metal lead?
They that was fine. It's they mine lead. You can use lead for a lot of things like paint.
Right. What about when I said the C word earlier?
No, that's fine. Okay. I did make a mistake, and a good buddy of mine, I had him on the show not too long ago, and it took me a few weeks to put him on because I was like, I'm going to get canceled. Because I didn't disagree with him or anything like that. It's just that everything you're not supposed to say, he said in a matter of 24 minutes.
Oh no.
And he said a lot. But it was but he sources everything. So it's not like I don't like people giving me information, and it's fine. It's kind of like when I heard this person is such and such. I'll keep it in the back of my mind, but I'm not going to react to it. but he sources his information. And I really appreciate when people give me information and they source it, because even if I don't agree, I can understand why you would.
Sure.
It's just like, well, that's possible, but I think it's going this direction. But we're living in a very polarized society right now. We are taught to polarize. If you don't like one thing, if you're pro-life, I hate everything about you.
Sure.
If you're a liberal, I hate everything about you. If you're a conservative, I was watching a TikTok earlier, the CCP's main goal.
Right.
It's kind of fun. I watch it all the time.
Yeah.
But it had a skit from SNL, and it was actually a pro-Trump skit. And I was like, what the?
Yeah.
That's not something you see. So I made a comment. I was like, I'm stunned. It's actually pro-Trump. Some douche canoe actually says that it's like, well, it doesn't take much to stun a Trump worshiper. And of course, he put the Trump, spelled it like a retard. Which, by the way, they quit using that in the psychological dictionary in 2014. So retard is no longer meant for anybody.
Okay.
It just means like music, retardando.
Right.
And he's gradually getting slower. But that was the first thing he said. And I'm like, I didn't even say anything about, who I supported and who I didn't, but people like to automatically assume about you if you say something that seems along this edge. It's like, why do we have to hate each other because we're different? I have a friend that is completely opposite of me. I mean, he truly believes anti-fascist and Antifa mean the same thing.
Huh.
That guy. And that's fine. I mean, if you want to believe that, but it's like, but if you start researching, if you research headlines, if you watch CNN, this is what this means, and we live in that world. And that's why I wanted to bring you on this show, because I don't know anything about it. And I mean, you hear the way I talk. I mean, I'm not I was that guy that I don't want to learn. I remember in college, I decided to go to college. I'd had back surgeries and stuff. And, and my uncle told me that I should get into computers. So the first thing I did was get into psychology because I didn't want to get into computers. I'm like, I don't need any of that stuff. In the 90s,
right,
we knew it was growing,
right,
but we didn't know it would be this important.
Right. And that's kind of where we are now with cryptocurrency. It's it's probably not 1995 anymore. It's probably more like 1997, 98. People are starting to use Netscape and AOL and stuff like that. But that's kind of where we're in the evolution of this whole digital monetary system, is because what Bitcoin is going to do, or what blockchain technology is going to do, is basically what the internet did to libraries and information and mail and all this stuff. So it's not like libraries went away. It's not like, these other elements that the internet disrupted went away. We still have brick and mortar stores, but these things became way more prominent, as far as when internet grew, the internet became more prominent. And blockchain technology and Bitcoin is basically going to do that to money and value. And so it's going to be really interesting to watch it unfold and where it's going. I mean, we're right now in a bear market. Prices are down, but that's starting to change in the next year or two. We're going to be entering in a new bull market, and especially if we have a banking collapse, which is not it's not improbable. Like we're probably pretty close. Bitcoin is probably going to drop with the rest of the markets like it did with COVID. But if you watch what happened with COVID, gold and silver and Bitcoin skyrocketed much faster afterwards, and made new all-time highs because, the answer was, we got to print more money. And if, let's say the BRIC nations decide, hey, which they are actively talking about, and they're actually putting together an alternative to the dollar system, a commodity-based money system that they would use. Saudi Arabia has basically signed a deal with Russia. Saudi Arabia is basically going to sell their oil, in things other than the dollar. And that's, and I don't mean to be a conspiracy theorist on this, but if the world reserve currency is the dollar, and the only thing that created artificial demand for the dollar was the OPEC agreement that, these OPEC nations had to sell their oil in dollars, essentially creating this artificial demand for dollars across the world. Well, every nation in the Middle East that we invaded or bombed, whether it be Syria, Libya, Iraq, what was the common denominator in all of them? Before they got bombed or before they got invaded, they were either going to sell their oil in euros or gold, or they were going to come out with a gold-backed currency.
I've said it a couple of times, is that lead has been the currency driver.
Right.
That's why America has been the standard, is because of lead. But now that most of our military don't even know what gender people are.
I know.
People aren't scared of it.
No, they're not scared of it. And that's the thing, is like the only thing that was backing up the dollar besides faith and confidence was military might. And now, we're not going to, just because Russia's going to start, buying and selling in either gold or Bitcoin or some other form of currency, or even the BRIC nations, we're not going to go invade a nuclear power. Yeah. I'm sorry. It's not going to happen.
No, I mean, we've gotten our priorities. It's not even based on the majority, because the majority of the people disagree with a lot of that stuff.
Right.
We've gotten where our priority is, what do they think? And honestly, I could go conspiracy theory and think that it is a designed plan. A lot of it does seem like Chinese, because China, if you look at the way they advertise there, they advertise strong men, everything very opposite of what we do. But over here, it's not that way at all. Yeah. Toxic masculinity, mansplaining. I'm like, no, the dude's just a douche.
Don't manspread, dude. You're manspreading.
I know, right? I'm like, I was like, no, I don't care. I'll be hated by everybody. I don't care. I don't care what you call yourself or transgender. I really don't care. It doesn't have anything to do with me. And the fact that I'm forced to have to be a part of the conversation pisses me off, because I don't want to be a part of it, because it's not my business what you do with your dick. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Don't force feed your delusions or whatever down my throat.
There's a reason why transgenders only made up like 0.2 to 0.4% of the youth, 20 years ago, and now they make up 20%. Or at least gender identity issues.
Right.
Whether.
Well, and that could be pretty broad though, too. I mean, I don't know what they're classifying as.
Exactly. But the fact that statistic is out there doesn't mean that it's true or not. It means that they're trying to make you believe.
Right. Because that would be like, could it even be like, oh, maybe I'm gay. Maybe I'm lesbian.
Yeah.
Like, they might even consider that in that statistic.
I've known lots of people that, or I say lots of people, mostly women, they considered it.
Sure.
I probably shouldn't say that, but I'm going to say it anyway. I used to say when I was younger and single that, most women were spaghetti lesbians. I'm not going to explain why. Just think about it. But it's because what I'm trying to get at is that people have them issues when they're younger. They don't know, they're searching, but that doesn't mean that's who they are.
Right.
They grow. And they're like, no, I went through a phase, I went through a phase that I wore, I don't even know what I wore it.
Got your nipples pierced?
Actually, yeah, I did. I did it one time. I got dared to, and I did it. And, I'm like, man, I was stupid. Now I have constant nipple hard-ons going on. It just sucks. But, we all go through that phase. Right. I had tongue piercing because in the 90s, for some reason, it became really popular. Right. And, but, in earlier 90s, I had a jacket that, was like a 3XL, and I was like an XS. Right. I was really small. Right. And I wore pants that were way too big for me and stuff. And yeah, I grew up country most of my life. Yeah. But for these small little couple of years, I decided I was going to try something else.
Right.
But now they're turning fads into lifestyles.
Right.
I was like, it's just a fad. It's just, we go through stages, and you can't, of course, they're like, you can't say somebody's going through a stage. Well, no, because you tell a kid that they're going through a stage, they're going like, no, I'm not. This is the way I am. This is who I am.
Right.
Of course they're going to say that. Just let people be people.
Sure. Yeah.
Love everybody. I just because I don't like what you're doing doesn't mean I hate you.
Sure.
Doesn't mean I'm thinking less of you, but we're trying to demasculate our society. And like, it's wrong to be a man. It's wrong to be a woman now. Yeah. I mean, try to be a woman in a competition. A man's going to beat you at it.
Exactly.
And they're going to allow it, and they're going to make you hate yourself for it if you don't allow it.
Right.
And it's like, no, people need to take control and say, this is who I am. This is what I'm going to do.
Sure.
I don't care your opinion. And I do like the idea of Bitcoin because it does in a lot of ways, now that you've explained it, because I didn't know. I really was completely ignorant of it. I mean, I had friends that knew about Bitcoin that get into it, and I'm like, I don't know. I have friends that think, reptilian people have taken over most of the government.
Sure.
I mean, I have lots of types of friends, but it gives you that sense of power that if something does happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's simply an alternative. It's simply a solution for a digital age that allows you to still transact in a digital world or live in a digital world monetarily without having monetary policy decided by an elite few or you not having the freedom to transact or take your money where you want to go. So it's really just a door of freedom for the digital age. And it's, just do your due diligence. And if you got doubts about it, you can always contact me at mattjmoore.com. I'd be more than happy to answer questions. But I've got a lot of videos, a lot of content. I do a radio show, so I produce a show every single week, and you can always listen to it on every major podcast platforms. But it's just important, even if you don't believe in Bitcoin or want to get involved in Bitcoin, at least know the difference between what Bitcoin is and how it works versus what the government's going to roll out. Because I guarantee you, whatever the government rolls out, it's going to be a hell of a lot worse than what you have any perception about Bitcoin right now.
I agree. Thank you for sticking around till the end. Hopefully I left you either enlightened, lightened, or moved by the experience. If you enjoyed what you saw, could you hit that like and subscribe button right there? And if you didn't, could you still hit that like and subscribe button right there so somebody else has the opportunity to not like what they saw? Thank you.
Wasn't enough. You can't wash away the stains when you're covered in mud.